Okay. Okay. Today we're going to start Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. Let's say it's about 10 lines from the bottom. Amr Rabbi Lozer, Amr Rabbi Hoshea. Yeah. Rameshi, we're up all night with the before
Yeah,
the bris.
basically. Yeah.
Gosh.
Transition. Yeah.
Okay. The bris is at 1, right?
Mitzvah Shem.
Okay. Sure. Okay. We thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. It's chus of our learning. We should have the base of Mikdash immediately. We're learning about someone that shechts an animal and there's no blood. We said that the shechita is kosher, but the shechita is kosher, and the meat is not hochsher lekabel tuma. It's not susceptible to tuma. Let's say there was blood, then it would be susceptible to tuma. Now, what type of tuma would it be? The Mishnah said, "Nachal biyadayim mesavais." It could be eaten with hands that are tamei. Now, hands that are tamei mean that the hands are sheni, which means that we have to be dealing with hektish because we're talking about a shlishi. So, because what would a sheni make? A sheni would make a shlishi. The rule is like this: that when it comes to regular mundane food, the only thing that could become regular mundane food could become a rishon or a sheni, a first level or a second level. It can't become a third level tuma. It means if a second level tuma touches it, it's still pure. It doesn't become doesn't go further than that. So hands are a second level. So if it's regular chulin, then it's not going to become shlishi. Like this time, you want to take away that your what is that avatar? He's staring at me. He's looking at me funny. So anyway, so what do we have to be doing? It can't be it can't be chulin, right? So it has to be kachim. The problem is it can't be kachim
It's really
because
Dr. Stein.
um, so it can't be kachim because we're speaking about a wild animal, a chaya. So we had some difficulty over here, and the last answer that we gave is that we were talking about Meiser Sheni. Animal is Meiser Sheni, and Meiser Sheni had a chumrah that it could become a shlishi, according to one opinion. Then we gave an answer that maybe it's following the opinion that the hands are a rishon, not a sheni, and then it could really be dealing with chulin. Okay, now we're up to this answer. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Hoshea. We're looking for what's the case of our Mishnah that we're saying that the meat could be eaten with impure hands because there was no blood by the shechita, so it wasn't susceptible. The meat didn't become susceptible to tumah. What type of status? What type of meat would become susceptible to tumah through a sheni latuma, through hands which are only a sheni? So Amar Rabbi Lazar we're not actually dealing with the carbon. We're dealing with chulin that's kept to a status of a carbon. Because this is someone that eats carbonas, probably a kayan. And whatever he eats, he likes to keep to that status because he never knows what's going to be a carbon, what's not. It's all the time, so he keeps everything to the same level. So what we're learning now is that someone that keeps his chulin to the level of kaidesh, of karbanas, then if that takes on, because this is the way he treats it, then the halachas of kaidesh would actually apply to it, and there would be a sheni. The sheni would make a shlishi. Would actually make a revi as well, probably. But say now, with the like Rabbi Yeshua, it's not going to fit with Rabbi Yeshua, because Rabbi Yeshua is going to hold that such chulin, such mundane food that's just kept to a status, not really that status of Kodesh, it's just treated like that, but it's not really that. He said that would not have a shlishi, according to Rabbi Yeshua. So we're going to be following this opinion, the opinion that opposes Rabbi Yeshua. Tanya was taught in a brisa. Rabbi Lezer frequently argues with Rabbi Yeshua. He says, "Ha'oichel oichel rishon," saying that a person that eats tummy food himself becomes tamei to the level of a rishon, and he shouldn't be eating. He shouldn't even be touching other things that will make it impure, because what he touches becomes a sheni. He becomes like the food that you are what you eat. That's what rishon. Sheni, if he eats a sheni level food, becomes a sheni. Okay. Shlishi, if he eats shlishi level food, then it becomes a shlishi. We have to see what type of food we're talking about. A regular chulin doesn't even have a shlishi. Rabbi Yeshua says, "Ha'oichel rishon v'sheni is a sheni." He says that a person doesn't become a rishon. He only becomes a sheni. So whether he eats rishon food or sheni food, he becomes a sheni. And then shlishi, we'll have to explain Rabbi Yeshua's view. The whole next page is going to be explaining Rabbi Yeshua's view. Shlishi is also a sheni. Sheni la kodesh becomes a sheni for kodesh. So wow, it goes stricter in a way. It looks like Rabbi Yeshua is more lenient, because he says a rishon doesn't become a rishon. Rishon becomes a sheni when he eats it. Then it says if he eats shlishi food, it becomes a sheni for kodesh, vein sheni l'truma, but not a sheni for truma. Only for kodesh he becomes a sheni. That means that even though he's eating shlishi food. Now shlishi would only make a revi, but for some reason it's jumping back to when he eats this food, he has to eat a certain amount in a certain amount of time, the impure food, he becomes a sheni, which would affect the way he's going to affect what he touches. And if he touches kodesh, so then that's going to be a shlishi. He's considered a sheni regarding kodesh, but not regarding truma. Vein sheni l'truma. If he touches truma, he's not going to be considered a sheni, even though we're making him a sheni for karbanas, but not for truma. And if Rabbi Shua finishes off, what are we talking about? What's this machlekes about? Chulin shenasu al taras truma. We're talking about chulin that was made, that's being kept to the status of how truma needs to be pure. We're talking about that this is not a person that eats karbanas. This is a person that normally eats truma. And so he keeps his even mundane grain to the level of truma. Okay, so according to at this level, we're going to have these halachas. But we explain al taras truma and al taras kodesh loy. We're only dealing with al taras truma. It's called chulin shenasu al taras truma. This is a person that's keeping his chulin to the level of truma. So he has these halachas. But if it would be al taras kodesh, but kasavar, chulin shenasu al taras kodesh lasbu shlishi. He holds that chulin that's kept to the status of kodesh, that means someone that usually eats karbanas, he would not have a shlishi. Now it's a little counterintuitive, because someone that keeps his chulin to the level of truma is the grain that's given to the kohen, 2 out of 100, 2%. So this has to be eaten betara. And when it comes to the levels of tumah, so it goes up until a shlishi. But when it comes to karbanas, that's an actual sacrifice. So that they have to be careful with tumah, and it actually goes to a level of a revi. So here, what about someone that's not actually eating the truma itself or the karbanas itself? He's eating mundane food that he keeps to that level of truma or kodesh, truma. So he said, well, if he keeps to the level of truma, then if it touches a sheni, then it's going to be, actually if it touches a shlishi, it's going to be a sheni. For kodesh, we're going to consider it, even though that's not what he normally eats. He normally doesn't eat kodesh. He normally eats truma, and he has a shlishi, which is a problem. It won't make truma pasul, but it itself is pasul. He won't be allowed to eat that. And if he does eat it, then he becomes a sheni regarding hekdesh, but not regarding hekdesh, but not regarding truma. See why not regarding Truma if it's going back. Whatever the case is, we said that this is talking about Chulin that he keeps to the level of Truma. Well, let's say it would be Chulin that he keeps to the level of Kodesh. We said, no, this halacha won't apply. So, even though it's counterintuitive, but that's what we're saying. So, but basically what we're saying over here is that Chulin shenasu al taras Truma. Oh, no, drop this al taras Truma. Chulin shenasu al taras HaKodesh is a machlekes Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua. If it would have a shlishi, Rabbi Elazar says yes, and Rabbi Yeshua says no. So hence, our Mishnah that says that hands would make impure hands, yadayim, hands, but which are sheni, would make the meat impure. Had the meat been susceptible, if there was blood there, that would apply to chulin shenaso al taras HaKodesh only according to Rabbi Elazar, because Rabbi Yeshua says there's no shlishi by chulin shenaso. Rabbi Yeshua says there's no shlishi and chulin shenaso al taras HaKodesh. The Gemara asks right away an obvious question. We turn to the top of Lamed Dalet. Why do you have to say it's only one opinion? It's only the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Why don't you say it's the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua? And we're not talking about chulin shenaso al taras HaKodesh, which is a machlekes. We're talking about chulin shenaso al taras truma, which is no machlekes. And then it would fit. Then you'd be able to say that both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua hold that there's a shlishi. So therefore your hands would make the meat of the carbon impure. Not the meat of the carbon. The meat of the chulin impure. We're not dealing with the carbon. We're dealing with we're dealing with the regular mundane animal, because we mentioned that we're dealing with a chaya. Wild animal. It can't be a carbon. So, but what we're looking for is, why should there be a difference if the meat got wet or it didn't get wet? That difference would only be if it's a person that keeps his chulin to the status of kodesh. We're asking, and it's only one opinion. We're asking, let it be keeps his level to truma, and it would fit according to both opinions, even according to Rabbi Yeshua. The Gemara says leisal kadaita. We can't be dealing with someone that keeps his all his grain to the level of truma. That's not what we're talking about. Because the ktani basar, because we're not even dealing with grain, we're dealing with meat. And the betruma basar miyaka, someone that keeps his food to the status of truma is only doing that for grain. He's not doing that for meat, because there's no such thing as meat that's truma. It's only grain that's truma. And meat and grain don't get mixed up. So when someone that keeps his meat, someone that keeps his grain pure, that has nothing to do with his meat. So we can't explain our Mishnah that we're dealing with the person that eats truma regularly, because it's not going to affect the halachas of the meat. Elamai bekachim. So what's it going to be? It must be that we're dealing with kachim. It says it can't be kachim because chai bekachim miyika. Can't be kachim either because you don't have wild animals that are karbanas. So, however, the Gemara explains that basar bebasar michlaf, basar beperle michlaf. We're dealing with someone that keeps his grain al taras HaKodesh, that keeps his food to taras HaKodesh to the level of eating karbanas. And even though it's impossible for this to be a karban, because here we're dealing also with wild animals, but nevertheless, someone that keeps his food to the level of kodesh would even keep his deer meat, his venison, his meat that it's impossible for it to be a karban. He would keep it to the level of a karban, because he doesn't want to be confused between a karban, what's a karban, what's not a karban. So he would keep it to that level. And so therefore, we're talking about someone that has chulin shenaso al taras HaKodesh. And we have special halachas by chulin shenaso al taras HaKodesh, so we say that that he does have a shlishi by chulin shenaso al taras HaKodesh. However, not according to Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua wouldn't say that. It's only Rabbi Eliezer. It's only Rabbi Eliezer. So that's why we said, that's why Rabbi Eliezer says in the Rabbi Yeshua that our Mishnah is really Rabbi Eliezer, not Rabbi Yeshua. and we're dealing with Chulin Shanasa Altaras HaKodesh. It can't be Altaras Truma, which Rabbi Shua would agree to, because then that wouldn't affect the status of the meat. We have to be dealing with something that does affect the status of the meat. That's only Altaras HaKodesh. Okay, Amar Ula. Ula is a traveler. He comes in and he says, Chavraya Amrin, that the friends, they say, B'chulin Shanasa Altaras HaKodesh should like Rabbi Shua. They say that we're actually dealing with Chulin Shanasa Altaras HaKodesh. And Rabbi Shua also would hold that there's no Shlishi Altaras HaKodesh. We said that there, and yeah, like the way we learned it, that there's no Shlishi Altaras HaKodesh. It's not like Rabbi Shua. But no, I mean, Rabbi Shua, I hold that it is Rabbi Shua. V'lemi Boikamer. And Rabbi Shua that said that we're dealing with Chulin Shanasa Altaras Truma, and we were Medayik, Altaras Truma in, Altaras HaKodesh Lai, he didn't mean that you have to be specific, that there would only be a Shlishi Altaras if you keep the Chulin Altaras Truma. He means that there's a Shlishi, there's a third level impurity, even if it's Altaras HaKodesh. Why do you say Truma? He says not only for sure Altaras HaKodesh, if it's Altaras HaKodesh, for sure Altaras Truma, because that's even more lenient. So if it's Altaras Truma, then it's for sure Altaras HaKodesh. With Truma is more lenient. For sure, where it's more strict, there's going to be a Shlishi. Not only is with Chulin Shnas Altaras HaKodesh, that means he always eats karbanas, so he wants to keep all his mundane food also holy. So I'm sorry. So that would be a that over there is a shlishi. Ala filu Chulin Shnas Altaras Truma nami is shlishi. But rather, even if it's only Altaras Truma, even if this person usually eats Truma, so he wants to keep all his food Truma, there would also be a Shlishi as well. In other words, Rabbi Yeshua would agree that there's a Shlishi Altaras Truma, and there's definitely a Shlishi Altaras HaKodesh. The opposite opinion held that it's only Altaras Truma, not Altaras HaKodesh, which we said was counterintuitive, but okay. Man Chavraya. Who has he said that the friends hold the way we said before? He said that's Rabbi Bar Bachana. Dama Rabbi Bar Bachana Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Bar Bachana says the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Okay, so it's important here to notice that it's Rabbi Yechanan talking, because Rabbi Yechanan is going to come up again when we turn the page. It says Maya Haji Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yeshua La'adadi. He says, "What? Tell me more about this conversation between Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua. We had an interesting machlekes, Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Lezer says that a Rishon becomes a Rishon, Sheni becomes a Sheni, Shlishi becomes a Shlishi. Very easy to remember. And Rabbi Yeshua says that a Rishon and a Sheni become a Sheni. A Shlishi becomes a Sheni for Kodesh, but not for Truma. Okay. So tell me what more about this conversation." So Amar Loi Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yechanan says that Rabbi Lezer says to Rabbi Yeshua, "Matzinu oichel chamer min ha'oichel." To read this with the right accent. Matzinu oichel, the eater, is chamer min ha'oichel, is more strict than the food. It's both the same word, but if you emphasize it differently, I think the oichel is the one that's eating, and oichel is the food. The person is more strict than the food. Why? Where do we see this? We say like this: De'ilu nevela seiftar b'chutz le'metame. If someone touches a nevela seiftar, he doesn't become tame. However, ilu oichla metame begadim beisabliya. But if someone eats a nevela seiftar is a kosher bird that died without shechita. So the rules of that are very interesting. That it does give off impurity, but only someone swallows a kazayas of it, not if someone touches it. So we see that the food, it itself, doesn't give off impurity, but eating it does give off impurity. So which means that what type of impurity? That the person's clothing become tummy. So we see that someone that eats is more stricter than the food. Touching the food doesn't do anything, and eating does. So we're going to say now that someone that eats should be strict. It should have exactly the status. If he's a Rishon, eats contaminated food, he becomes a Rishon. Yar, what you eat? Sheni, he becomes a Sheni. That's Rabbi Lezer's opinion. he becomes exactly what it is. However, Rabbi Yeshua, what is Rabbi Yeshua? I'm sorry, I skipped the line. So how can we not say that the person that's eating should not be? It's really supposed to be leinasa oichel ka'oichel. How come the person how can you say that the person that's eating it shouldn't be like the food? The person that's eating should even be stricter. At least he should be like the food. Okay, we're in the middle of 34a. Rabbi Yeshua responds to that. Don't learn from Nevela Seif Torah. Your proof that you wanted to say that a person that eats is stricter than the food. You bring a proof from someone that eats from a kosher bird that died. That should teach us that that he becomes more contaminated than the food itself. So it says that's a chiddush, and you can't learn from a chiddush. That's a anomaly. That doesn't prove to the rule. That's a special case. Ella, he says, on the contrary, we see that food is more strict than the person that eats it. If someone touches food that's the size of an egg, or a food touches food that's the size of an egg, that food becomes contaminated. But if to make a person contaminated from eating food, he would have to eat 2 eggs, chatzi pras, a half of a loaf. A pras is 4 eggs. I guess a whole loaf would be 8 eggs. So this would be 8 eggs of flour, not how many eggs you put into the dough. 8 eggs of flour. So 8 flour size eggs. Let's say an egg is 2 ounces. So it would be 16 ounces of flour. And that would be a full loaf. And now a chatzi pras would be 4 ounces. You would have to eat that amount. In order to give off impurity, it would have to be 2 ounces, let's say, the size of an egg, by touching it. But to make a person impure, it would have to be 4 ounces. We see that the person becoming tummy is even stricter than the food. That's the case. Then vanu, how can you say that a rishon becomes a rishon, a sheni becomes a sheni? If he eats a rishon, it becomes a rishon. If he eats a sheni, it becomes a sheni. The food is stricter than the person. It has to go down a level. The rishon should be a sheni. Okay. Rabbi Lezer responds to that. To Mishir Gamlinan. Your claim that how do we know that the food is stricter than the person is from the size, from the amount. He says the size doesn't matter. That doesn't tell me anything about the severity of the law. Just because this one requires more, this one requires less. That's how the Rabbanan set it up with the shiurim. The shiurim, that's a special thing with shiurim. That doesn't tell me the severity of the law. That's Rabbi Lezer's opinion. Rabbi Lezer also comments. He says, "Ledvarecha, according to you, Rabbi Yeshua Shatayim al Rishon Sheni, that you say that a Rishon becomes a Sheni, Yafa. That fits. Goes down a level. A Rishon, you say that according to you, the way you think about this, that a person is less impure than the food that's impure, than the food that he eats. So when he said when he eats a rishon, he becomes a sheni. He says, okay, that makes sense. According to your view, I don't hold like that, but according to you, that makes sense. However, sheni lama. So why when he eats a sheni, does he become a sheni? Amalai. So Rabbi Yeshua responds to Rabbi Eliezer. He says, Matzinu sheni es sheni al dei mashkin. What happens is that liquids have a special halacha, that liquids that become impure, instead of becoming the level of impurity, they actually go back to being a rishon. So if there's a food that's very wet that has a liquid outside of it, and it touches something that's impure, so the liquid becomes a rishon. Let's say it touches a sheni. So it really should be a shlishi, but because we have some strict laws of the of liquids, so we say that liquid becomes a rishon, and then when that liquid, that mashkin, that liquid touches this food, so it becomes a sheni. So you see that it happens sometimes that a sheni touches something, becomes a sheni. So that's because we see that happens. So that's what we're going to apply over here also. If he's going to eat a sheni, it's going to become a sheni. Malay, v'hamashkin nami tchila havi. But the liquid becomes a rishon. So why do you make him a rishon? Rabbi Shua doesn't want to learn that the person is going to become like a rishon. But Rebbe Lezer is just responding to that. The Tanan, because we have a Mishnah. This is Rebbe Lezer talking. He says, "Kol ha'paisel truma," anything that would make truma pasul. That means a sheni that would touch truma would make it a shlishi. That means pasul. That would make mashkin into a rishon, make liquid into a rishon. That's support for Rebbe Lezer's question to Rabbi Shua. But another question that he has, shlishi sheni lama. How do you get this idea that a shlishi goes back to being a sheni? Amar loi, Rabbi Shua responds, Afni le'amarti ala b'truma. I wasn't talking about everything that a shlishi makes a sheni. I was only talking about truma. Talking about truma, that chulin shenasu al taras truma, shetarasa tumahu eitzel hakodesh. Because since truma is more lenient than kodesh, so therefore we don't trust you so much when it comes to truma. We don't trust you that you're really keeping it so pure for kodesh. So therefore, if you're keeping it only at a status of truma, when it comes to kodesh, I'm going to consider it even a sheni. I'm going to go back a level because for kodesh we don't consider that. Really keeping it pure, when you're just keeping it pure for truma. Okay, this conversation tells us that Rabbi Bar Bar Chana held that if it comes to kodesh itself, we won't say this halacha. We had an extra strict halacha that when it comes to truma or chulin that's kept to the status of truma, we said that was going to be stricter than chulin that's kept to the status of kodesh. So that's so strange, because kodesh is more strict. So if it's kept it should be stricter if it's kept to the status of a carbon. You're telling me that you're only keeping it to the level of that only if it's kept to the level of truma are you going to be strict, and for kodesh you're going to be more lenient. It's like counterintuitive. So now, according to Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, he's explaining, based on this conversation, that the reason why we're stricter by truma is because if you're keeping it pure to the level of truma, then we don't trust you that it's pure to the level of kodesh. So that's why we're strict by the more lenient one. We're strict by the lenient one because when it comes to kodesh, we don't consider that to be kept pure. Okay. Whatever the case is, we now have the opinion of Rabbi Bar Bar Chana that says it's specifically by chulin shenasu al taras truma, but not al taras kodesh. In Ula, he says that no, he doesn't have this conversation. This conversation was a tradition that Rabbi Bar Bar Chana had from Rabbi Yechanan, and Ula says, I don't have that conversation. There's other options of how Ula gets away with this, but he's basically saying that when Rabbi Yeshua says that chulin shenasu al taras truma, if it's a shlishi, it makes a sheni. He says, I would hold that if it's chulin shenasu al taras kodesh as well. He says, loimi by taras kodesh that there's a shlishi, but even truma is a shlishi. Okay. Now the last line. We turn the page, but it says, Afni lamatil b'truma shetarasa, that even if it's pure, but tumi yitzla kodesh. In other words, the kodesh, even when it's pure, but kodesh would still be tameh. So therefore, we're going to be stricter by truma when it comes to kodesh. So we're going to be stricter about food that's kept to the level of truma. We'll be strict about kodesh. We'll say that it's not considered pure. Okay. Amar Reb Zera. Amar Reb Asi, Amar Reb Yechanan, Amar Reb Yanai. Reb Yanai is a teacher of Reb Yechanan. So this is a bunch of generations here. We have Reb Zera that comes to Eretz Yisrael, remember? He travels, he's the one that fasted to forget, or not to forget, the Talmud Bavli. Comes to Reb Asi, or Reb Yechanan. He hears from Reb Asi, he hears the name of Reb Yechanan, he hears the name of Reb Yanai. Now, to point out that we did have a Reb Yechanan before, that Rabbi Bar Barchana was quoting, that had a conversation between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua that made it quite clear that Chullin Shenasu al Taras Truma is going to have a severity over Chullin Shenasu al Taras HaKodesh. If it's kept to the level of Truma, which is a more lenient level, it's going to have a severity over things that are kept to the stricter level. And the reason for that was because that we didn't consider things that are kept to the lenient level to be pure enough for the holy Allah. That's what we learned before. Now we say ha'eichel shlishi shel chulin shenas al taras hakodesh nasa gufa sheni lakodesh. It's exactly the opposite of what we said before. But someone that eats a shlishi of chulin shenas al taras hakodesh, mundane food, that's kept to the level of Kodesh. We're dealing with probably a Kayan that keeps all his food Kodesh because all the time he's in the Beis Hamikdash and eats karbanos. He doesn't want to get confused about purity, not impurity. He's careful with everything. So if he does eat a shlishi, then his body, eats of this food, his body becomes a sheni. Regarding Kodesh, that means if he touches a carbon's going to be a shlishi. Okay. Isri Reb Zera Rabasi. Reb Zera asks Rabasi, shlishi, if he eats shlishi food, then he becomes a sheni lakodesh. Vein sheni l'truma. But it doesn't become a sheni for truma. That's obviously what you're saying. That means he becomes a sheni, he eats a shlishi food, he becomes a sheni regarding kodesh, but not regarding truma. In other words, if he touches truma, it's still not going to be a problem because what he ate was a shlishi. And shlishi for truma doesn't make truma of anything wrong. So, okay. And what are we talking about? B'chulin shenas al taras truma. We're talking about chulin. This is Rabbi Yeshua's view that he's quoting. Shlishi shein l'kodesh, vein shein l'truma, b'chulin shenas al taras truma. So Reb Zera is quoting Rabbi Yeshua. That when it's Rabbi Yeshua, his words were chulin shenasu al taras truma. We had a machlekes if he meant specific or if he meant or if that was the chiddush. But not only, whatever the case is, we're saying chulin shenasu al taras truma. Al taras truma in al taras kodesh loy is medayak that it's only al taras truma where a shlishi would make a sheni, would make the person that eats it into a sheni. And al taras hakodesh loy. So how did you tell me that if a shlishi that eats someone that eats shlishi food that's kept to al taras hakodesh becomes a sheni? Rabbi Yeshua says no. Rabbi Yeshua says only al taras truma. Amar lei, he says lei mi bai kamar. Rabbi Yeshua said that it's al taras truma. He didn't mean al taras truma. He meant even al taras truma, but for sure al taras hakodesh. So, which means that what I said was correct. It would go in, and it would apply in another case as well. But for sure that what I said is correct. We ask, "Afani le'amarti." This has to be in quotations. Afani le'amarti el b'truma kamar. he's accepting the conversation that Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Bar Bachana, that when Rabbi Yeshua said that it's Chulin Shenasu Altaris Truma, he meant it specifically Altaris Truma, but not Altaris HaKodesh. And that explanation, the explanation for that was given, was because Chulin Shenasu Altaris Truma is not kept to the right level that would be satisfactory for Kodesh. So if when it comes to Kodesh, we're going to be even stricter. So only if the food is kept to Altaris Truma are we going to say that it has this level. And it's a contradiction now, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yochanan, because this was a statement of Rabbi Yochanan that says Chulin Shenas Altaris HaKodesh Shlishi would make a Sheni. And before we said that that doesn't apply to Altaris HaKodesh, it only applies to Truma, Altaris Truma. So the Gemara answers, I'm right, and I believe the Rabbi Yochanan. Okay. There's different opinions about what Rabbi Yochanan holds, and that's how we're resolving this issue here. Mosquito. Okay. Esvei, we did the Esvei. We're holding now Amar Ula. Ula says, Eichel Shlishi Shel Chulin Shnasa Altaris Truma. Someone eats a Shlishi of Chulin. This Chulin was kept to the level of Truma. Nifsal Gufay Milechal B'Truma. Then he can't eat Truma anymore. He becomes what he eats. And even though really a Shlishi doesn't contaminate Truma, only a Sheni would would contaminate Truma. Shlishi is the third level already. But when he eats it, he can't eat Truma. My Kamash Malantanina. What's Ula telling me? We learned this in a Mishnah or a Brisa. It's a Shlishi Sheni LaKodesh, Vein Sheni LaTruma, B'chol Shnasu Altaris Truma. A Shlishi, if someone eats a Shlishi, he becomes a Sheni for Kodesh. But he doesn't become a Sheni for Truma. And that's dealing with Chulin Shnasu Altaris Truma. So he eats a Shlishi, he goes back to, he gets more strict than where he started. And we explained why, because of the mashkin, the liquid that's on it, so we make it a little stricter. He goes back to being a Sheni, and that was dealing with, for Kodesh. He becomes back to being for Kodesh, and we're dealing with food that was kept to a status of Truma purity. Sheni Udleihavi. When it comes to, but not if it's kept to Truma Chonshas. Sheni Udleihavi. Hashlishi Havi. He said that he's not a Sheni for Truma, but he is a Shlishi. If he's a Shlishi, then that's exactly what Ula says. So if you have a Mishnah or a Brisa that tells us this, why does Ula need to tell us this? That someone that eats a Shlishi of Chulin, Shenas Altaris Truma, becomes a Shlishi. So we answer, if we just learned from that Brisa, Havamina Leisheni Havi V'Leishlishi Havi. I could have thought that he's not a Sheni or a Shlishi. If I become a Sheni B'Kodesh, Amanami and Sheni B'Truma, I was just saying that he doesn't become a Sheni for Kodesh. You said, okay, so he doesn't become a Sheni. Obviously becomes a Shlishi. He said, no, he doesn't become a Sheni or a Shlishi. So why do you say a Sheni? He says, because for something else he becomes a Sheni. For Kodesh he becomes a Sheni. For Truma he doesn't. But I could have thought that he doesn't become a Shlishi either. So why do you say he doesn't become a Sheni if he doesn't become a Shlishi? You should have said a bigger Chiddush. So the answer, we say that the reason why we said this one was because that's what we're referring to in the other case. I could have thought that's really, he doesn't become a Shlishi either. So what's now the Chiddush of Ula is that he does become a Shlishi. Okay. Kamash Malan Ula, that it becomes a Shlishi. Isvei Rav Hamnuna L'Ula. Rav Hamnuna has a question. It says like this: Harishon Shebechulin Tamei Umetama. If Chullin food becomes a rishon, means it touches something, touches a sheretz, let's say. So now it could make other things tamei, means a sheni, and those things could make other things tamei, a shlishi. That's the words tamei. What it touches becomes tamei, umetame, and it could make what it touches also tamei. Also give off what it touches could also give off impurity. Asheni, let's say food that touched something that touched the sheretz, yeah. So now this food is now a sheni; it's not a rishon. So it says that's paisel ve'eino matame. It would make what it touches tamei, but that what it touched can't make anything else. So the word for that is called paisel. Means it only goes one level. Matame means that it goes two levels. What it makes, what it touches, would also give off to me. But here it's only paisel. Bashlishi, if it touches, if it's a third level of now usually regular mundane food doesn't become a third level, so we'd have to be talking about something that's kept to a higher standard. Regular mundane food only becomes a second level, so maybe we're dealing with mundane food that's kept to the status of truma, which has a third level. It says if it becomes a third level, then nechal b'nezid adema. You're allowed to add in spices. Nezid adema is a type of stew that you're allowed to add in spices of truma or oil. What we're learning now is that we have chulin shenasu al taras truma. It's kept to the status of truma, and a person's going to be eating it, and he's going to be eating truma as well because we're mixing spices in. If we say that someone that eats a shlishi, he becomes prohibited now to eat truma. So we're feeding him food that he's not allowed to eat. How did you say that you're allowed to mix in truma spices into this? There's two problems here. First of all, you're feeding him things that are going to make him that he can't eat, and also you're feeding him truma spices together with it. So we respond to that. Hanach lenazira dema deleka kazayas bechtechilas pras. Nazira dema doesn't give off impurity to the person because you can never eat. You can never eat enough of it. In order for the body to get the status of the food that he's eating, he has to eat a kazayas bechtechilas pras. I'm sorry. In order for a person that's to be liable for eating truma when he's not allowed to, he would have to eat the amount of kazayas bechtechilas pras. Now, since we only have spices of truma in this food, so you'll never get the amount of spices that you're going to eat enough food of you're going to get kazayas of this in a k'dechilas pras. K'dechilas pras is a time measurement, the amount of time it takes to eat half a loaf of bread, four eggs. 8 ounces of flour. So the spices that you put in, you'll never get that amount of spices to get a full kazayas. In that mixture, it's obviously going to take longer. So we're not worried about it. It's interesting that the Gemara is giving this answer because so he has less than a share. Less than a share should also not be allowed. Why are we saying that it's less than a share, so it's no problem? Usually we say less than a share, you shouldn't. It comes to the malchus. It comes to, let me see what the answer to this. I guess what we're saying is because maybe this is midrabanan. This tumah that he's getting is midrabanan. We don't extend it to things that wouldn't be the biblical law. Maybe that's what it means. Okay. That was a question that Rav Hamnuna asked Ula, that apparently you could eat truma even if a person ate shlishi food. And we answered that no. We said that this is a special case because it's only tavlin, it's only spices, which he's never going to get the right amount. Amar Rabbi Yonasan, Amar Rebbe. Rabbi Yonasan says in the name of Rebbe, Eichel shlishi shel truma atzma asa lechal umataliga. If someone eats a shlishi of truma, probably wasn't supposed to do that because shlishi of truma is actually considered tamei. But if he did, then he's not allowed to eat more truma, but he is allowed to touch. Why is he not allowed to eat more? Like Ula says, if someone that eats a shlishi becomes a shlishi. Yeah, we had this already. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Now, both Ula and Rabbi Yonasan are necessary, even though they're both saying the same thing, but they're both necessary. If it would only tell us, if we would only know the halacha of Ula says that if someone that eats a shlishi becomes a shlishi, so even by chulin shenas al taras truma, then I would have thought that it's specifically chulin shenas al taras truma. Aval truma, but if he would have eaten a shlishi of truma itself, then again ami aser. Then even if he would touch other things, it would be aser. Here we're saying that it's only he's not allowed to eat other food. What about if he touches it? We said that's not a problem. So I would have thought from Ula that touching would be a problem if it would be truma. So it's to Rabbi Yonasan to tell me that truma itself, touching is not a problem. And if we don't tell him Rabbi Yonasan, that's talking about not chulin shenas al taras truma, not mundane food that's kept to a status of truma, but truma itself. That's Rabbi Yonasan's case. Truma. I would only say that truma has a status where a person becomes prohibited from eating truma because he ate impure truma. Aval chulin, but if he would have eaten mundane food, b'achila namishari, he would even be allowed to eat truma. It's because chulin shenas al taras truma doesn't make the person to that level. So tzrichi mashmalan, it comes to tell us that you need both. You need Ula to teach me that even chulin shenas al taras truma will make a person forbidden from eating other truma. Yosef Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta. Kamei Rav Nachman. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta sitting in front of Rav Nachman. Yosef v'ka'amar. Sitting and he says like this. Ha'eichel shlishi shel chulin shenas al taras hakodesh tar lechol kodesh. If someone eats mundane food that was kept to a status of karbanos, and it was a shlishi, and he eats it, he's still allowed to eat a karban. You don't have a revi'i by chulin shenas al taras hakodesh. You only have a revi'i, the fourth level impurity, which is unique, only by a karban. You only have it by an actual karban, not by the mundane food that's kept to the level of a karban. Masav Rami bar Chama says, shlishi is sheni l'kodesh. 1 second. We have a clear brisa that says exactly the opposite. We say that there is a concept of a revi'i, something that's a shlishi, that if someone eats it, then he can't have kodesh to the extent that he becomes a sheni. He goes even further back. We're even more strict. And this is only chulin shenas al taras truma. It's not a karban. And we see what happens by a shlishi. He becomes a sheni. Amarlei hanach l'truma. You're dealing with food that's kept to a status of truma. Shetarasa tumei tzala kodesh. The reason why we're saying that he can't eat kodesh is because is because food that's kept to a status of truma, we don't consider it pure enough for kodesh. Minat Tamra, where do we know this from? The Tanan, because we have a Mishnah. It says, Big the Amaretz Medrash Leperushim, clothing of a Amaretz, someone that doesn't keep the laws of purity, is considered Tamei Medrash for Perushim. Perushim means the Chaver. This is where the Pharisee comes from. Perushim is a Pharisee, because they would keep their things pure. Yeah. Big day Perushim, Medrash Leichle Truma. The clothing of a regular chaver. So, but nevertheless, he doesn't keep it to the level of people that are eating truma. So we consider his clothing impure. We'd have to put it in the mikveh before someone that's eating truma would want to wear it. Big derech truma medrash l'kodesh. People that eat truma but don't eat karbanos, we would consider their food medrash, tamei medrash, a very strict law for kodesh. So that's a proof that we say that why are we saying that chulin shenas al taras truma is going to be strict when it comes to karbanos, because truma isn't a high enough standard for karbanos. We're going to consider it impure, just like we do by the clothing. It says no. Amarava midrasis kamret. You're bringing a proof from clothing that's considered sat upon, because people when they sit down they sit on the clothing. Shani midrasis over there it's much stricter. Maybe his wife that was a nida sat on it. He wasn't careful with that. Medrash is going to be different than food. Sitting on, so that's why we're going to be strict over there. But we don't say that fruits should be that strict. That if someone with foods that would be shlishi or tahar for truma should be tummy for kodesh. That we don't say. It's only by the clothing where we have that strictness. Okay, Rabbi Yitzchak. So why did Rabbi Yitzchak say this? Rabbi Yitzchak said, Tahar b'lechol kodesh. Rabbi Yitzchak beperi nami amar. See, let me say this. Rabbi Yitzchak said that if someone eats a shlishi of chulin shenasal taras hakodesh, he's pure. Oh, he's considered pure for karbanos. Only kodesh makodesh. Oh, because Rabbi Yitzchak responded to Rami Bar Chama that said, "What are you talking about? We find other cases where there's things that are tamei that are not karbanos that will become a revi, like chulin shenasu al taras truma. We were saying that was going to be a problem." So we said, "Oh, that's because that's a din in truma." That's what we responded to Rabbi Yitzchak. So now Rabbi Yitzchak says, "The peri nami amar." That the concern of eichlei truma, not keeping the things to the right level, that exists even by fruits, not just by clothing. So when it comes to kodesh, food that's kept to the status of kodesh, we say that there is no Revi. Right? If someone eats a shlishi, is still allowed to eat a carbon. That's eats a shlishi of chon shnas al taras hakodesh is still allowed to eat a carbon. That's what Rabbi Yitzchak said. But that's because it was kept to a status. His shlishi was mundane food that was kept to a status of karbanos. If it would have been kept to a status of truma, then he would not be allowed to. That's what Rabbi Yitzchak Nami Omer. That by truma we would say that we have a concern that maybe he didn't keep it to the right level. Massive Rav Yirmiyah Midifti. Rav Yirmiyah Bar Difti has a question. We have should we say that by Paris we have the same concern that we have by the garments? We say that garments of people that are careful with truma is not considered pure for people that eat karbanos. You want to say the same thing about the foods, that the foods also are going to have a problem about Tanan. Problem is we have a Mishnah in Chagiga. It says, Im Amar, an Amaretz comes, and he says he's bringing wine for Truma to a Kayan. Ifrashti l'seicha revius kaidesh. Neman. If he says that this wine that I'm giving you is Truma, I actually used it. I don't know if it means that I still have in it, or I took from it. Ifrashti l'seicha, I think means I separated and it's still inside wine that I'm going to use as a carbon. Guess the rest is going to be truma for you. But otherwise, I'm keeping it pure for nesachem. I'm going to pour it on the mizbeach. So he's neman. So now we know that it's 100% pure, because if he's keeping it pure for a carbon, he knows that he was very careful with it. We don't say that the truma is going to invalidate the kaidesh. Okay. If we say that pure truma is not kept to the level of kaidesh, and therefore anything that's truma, we suspect that maybe it's going to contaminate the kaidesh. Because we said that by the garments, we said that they were considered impure. Someone that kept his things for truma his garments considered impure for kaidesh. We said that fruits maybe was not so. If we say that fruits is the same thing, that fruits are going to contaminate the kaidesh, then this wine of truma should contaminate the wine that's going to be used as a libation. That's the question of Rabbi Yirmiyah Midifti on Rabbi Yitzchak that says that you have to be concerned about fruits of someone that eats truma. Amalei, Rabbi Yitzchak responds, Tuma b'chiburin ka'amrit. You're telling me about the connection of tuma that's together with, you're telling me about truma that's together with kaidesh in the same barrel. Tuma b'chiburin shiny. Over there we don't not concerned. Because it's attached, because it's all together. So if you're trusted to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash, you'll also be trusted to give it to the Kohen. Okay. Masav Rav Huna Bar Nassan. Rav Huna Bar Nassan has a question from a Mishnah in Taras. It says, Hasheni shebechulin mitami mashkechulin. Something that's a second level will make liquid into a first level. We learned that before, that liquid goes back to one level, it becomes a rishon. Upaisel eichlei truma will also invalidate, the sheni will also invalidate someone that eats truma. Not someone, it will invalidate food of truma. Invalidate means that it will make it tamei, but that tuma won't be able to extend to the next level. That's what it's called, invalidate, paisel. Upaisel eichlei kaidesh. I'm sorry, I skipped the line. Paisel Oichle Truma. Bahashlishi, if it's a third level of Tuma, that's Metame Mashke Kodesh, that would invalidate, that would make impure liquid of Kodesh. It will turn it in, like let's say oil, it would make it into a Rishon. Upaisel Oichle Kodesh. And it will make the food of Kodesh into a Revi'i. We're talking about a Shlishi. Shlishi can make a Rishon when it comes to liquid, and a Shlishi makes a Revi'i for Kodesh. And we're talking about Bechul and Shanas al Taras HaKodesh. We're talking about mundane food here that's kept to the level of Kodesh, but has the same halachas of it. The problem is that this contradicts what we learned before, that it doesn't apply, that there is no Revi by Chul and Shanas al Taras HaKodesh. So it was only by Kodesh Makudesh itself. Only by Kodesh Makudesh itself. Here we're saying that it even applies to Chul and Shanas al Taras HaKodesh. My answer is, don't worry about that. Tanaihi. It's Machlekes Tanoim. The Tanya, the Brisa says, Chulin Shanas al Taras HaKodesh Rein Kechulin. Chulin that's kept at Taras HaKodesh have the level of Chulin, and they don't have a Shlishi. Rabbi Lezer Bar Tzadok Aimer Harin Ketruma. They have a level. They do have a Shlishi. They're like a Truma Latame Shnayim Lifsal Echad, and it will make Tamei two things, a Rishon and a Sheni. And it will make a puzzle also a Shlishi. So, which means that according to Rabbi Lezer Bar Tzadok, that would be a support for Rabbi Yitzchak, that you only have a Shlishi for Chulin al Tanas al Taras Kodesh, but you don't have a Revi. So you're worried about a brisa that says that you do have a Revi. Don't worry about that, because he has a source. He has a Rabbi Lezer Bar Tzadok, who's the son of Rabbi Tzadok, that fasted for 40 years during the time of the Beis Hamikdash. He's a support that there's no Revi by Chulin Shanas al Taras Kodesh. Okay, let's leave it over here. We're up to Reb Shimon Aimer in the middle of Lamed Hayim base.
Nice. Okay.
Okay. Have a good day, everyone. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Good day.
Yeah, have a good day. Tzlacha.